as the worn-out engine of my old truck growled beneath me. The long, desolate road stretched out before me, leading me back to the place I vowed I would never return to. Darry. My best friend growing up, Henry, was murdered under a bridge. His body was nearly unrecognizable from his injuries. There's no leads, no possible suspects, but I'm getting the feeling that I know exactly who or what is responsible. My name is Ethan, and I'm no hero. I'm just a survivor. Damn it, Henry! I told you to leave that hellhole, but you were too stubborn. You called it brave. Now look where that's gotten you. Pride. That's why I gave up on pride years ago. But here I am, on my way to the funeral of a friend that I haven't spoken to in years. Now I live in a camper in Los Angeles, scraping by as a survivalist instructor. But hey, it's a living, I guess. For you to understand why I left, I'll need to take you back to the beginning. We grew up in the 50s. The only technology we had back then was a 12-inch black and white TV that got 3 channels, and that was if you were doing well for yourself. It all started in the summer of 1957 when a sense of camaraderie and innocence defined my young novice life. We were just a couple of kids with an enormous imagination. In the summertime, we had the freedom to leave on our own bikes and not come home until it was dark. Henry and I roamed the streets of Darry on our bikes, carrying us to the most daring of our adventures, like leaving a flaming bag of poop in front of Mrs. Kennedy's porch and ringing the doorbell. We explored the woods near the Barrens, where we imagined ourselves as daring heroes on epic quests. Back in those days, the world was our playground, and the creaking wooden bridge by the creek became our hideout. And this is where his body was found. Why? I pulled up to the Darry townhouse where I'd spend the night and try to get a little sleep. It used to be one of the grandest places in Darry. The intricate details that were a staple of early American architecture, now covered by sporadic vines and moss, showcasing the juxtaposition of how people used to care. The next morning came time to bury my friend. It was a small service at the Darry Municipal Cemetery. Old acquaintances exchanged the obligatory greetings, but I kept myself mostly. I placed my hand upon Henry's coffin, and like a shock, I was taken back to the summer of 1957. Henry and I were near the creaking bridge, painting our newly constructed fort we dubbed the Sanctuary. We grabbed an old can of red paint from my parents' garage. The fort sat on a couple of big stable branches of a large oak tree. We were listening to That'll Be the Day by Buddy Holly on our radio, and then the radio began acting up. The line where he says, "That'll be the day that I die," kept repeating over and over again. I tried adjusting the knob on the radio, but the song kept looping that section over and over again. We were confused and pretty unnerved about it. All of a sudden, we look up at the wall we had just painted and it said, "This is the day that you die," written in the red paint. As we were looking at this, we start to see red balloons spilling out of the windows of our makeshift fort. It startled me, and I fell from the platform and landed on my back, knocking the air out of me. When I looked up, I saw Henry still up there screaming at me frantically, not realizing that standing behind him was a clown with an evil grin on his face. I tried to tell him, but I hadn't regained my breathing yet, so no sound came out, almost like when you scream in a nightmare and nothing but a wheezing sound comes out. Luckily, he jumped down and helped me up in time. When I looked back up, the clown was gone, or so I thought. I finally gained my ability to speak and said, "Did you see that?" He thought I was talking about me falling, and I said, "No, not that. The clown." He looked at me and almost turned pale with bewildered eyes. "You saw a clown?" he said. The look on his eyes told me that he's seen the clown before, too. We ran as fast as we ever could over the creaking bridge and back to civilization. We made it out. As we turned around from where we came from, there he was, popping out beside a tree. I considered myself brave until that day. After that, I couldn't stop thinking about what we had seen. We rode our bikes as fast as we could to my house, and once we made it, we had to catch our breath. "What the f*** was that?" I said. Henry said he's seen it before, but he didn't say anything because he thought he might have been going crazy. Except when he saw it, it wasn't a clown. Henry has a deep-seated fear of spiders, and he said that when he went into his basement to get a flashlight for a camping trip for scouts, there was a monster down there. He heard clicking noises, and when he turned the flashlight on and aimed it at the noise to see what it was, he saw a giant man-spider hybrid coughing up bits of human remains, and then it ran towards him. But he was able to make it up the stairs and slam the door. Not 5 seconds after this, his father opened the door, having no clue what he was freaking out about, and there was nothing. I believe that whatever we both saw, it was the same thing. We both told our parents what we saw, but they just didn't believe us, or didn't care. When I kept pressing my mom about it, she just told me to grow up and took a big swig of wine straight out of the bottle. That's when it kind of clicked that we were alone in this. Our families weren't going to be of any help. Throughout the rest of the summer, we barely slept, and sure as hell never went back into the woods. As the days went by, the newspapers had different headlines, but they were all about the same thing. Headlines like, "Parents hold vigil as search continues for missing children in Darry," or "Authorities investigate string of missing children," things like that. What confused the hell out of me was the rest of the parents and authorities didn't have any curfews or safeguards in place, like the whole town was under a spell. Why weren't they protecting us? Henry made me promise that no matter what, we'd stick together. No one else cared. And then it happened again. My mom told me to get the laundry hanging outside on the clothesline. The air felt stale, and storm clouds were rolling in. The sheets were waving and snapping from the wind, and out of thin air, the clown appeared behind the sheets. His demented face shone in between the rhythm of the flapping linens. Then his appearance changed. A few years earlier when I was little, I was terrified of the creature from the Black Lagoon, and he became the most twisted version of this monster straight from my own nightmares. I was stepping back and lost my footing, and fell backwards. It then stepped out and began stumbling towards me with its mouth open wide, and slime coming out of its mouth. It leaned down and grabbed my ankle. I was petrified, but I managed to kick it in the face, and that bought me enough time to gather myself and run for the house. I ran inside and locked the door. I then moved the curtain covering the window to the back door and peeked out. It was no longer storming, and it was just a peaceful, yet eerie stillness. After a while, kids stopped going missing, and we felt like we could head back to the fort. We crossed the bridge, and the treehouse was right where we left it, nearly completed. I don't know if it was an act of defiance or an act of tricking ourselves into thinking things were back to normal, but we finished painting it and put the final touches on it. Even now, I don't know if I've ever felt a sense of achievement like I did in that moment. We stood up on the roof, with red paint marking our faces like war paint, and raised our arms and screamed at the top of our lungs, like a battle cry. That feeling was short-lived, because in that second as I looked down, I was no longer standing on top of our treehouse. I was standing in a cemetery, and a gravestone in front of me which read, "Taken too soon, Henry Myers." Then the letters began dripping with blood, and a hand with a white glove began creepily extending up behind the tombstone, gripping the top edge, and soon revealed itself with a sinister grin.
"Oh, hiya, Ethan. Why don't you want to play with us? There's so many sights to show you. Your friend Henry is playing with us."
He then reached down behind the grave where I couldn't see and grabbed something. He held his hands down for a moment and looked up at me as his face lit up, like he found something exciting. He lifted his arms, and in his hands was the head of Henry. The expressionless, droopy face of Henry then opened his eyes and cried to me. I snapped out of it, and I looked back at the funeral home, my hand still perched on Henry's coffin. I jerked my hand away and collected myself. I made my way towards the back of the procession and sat down. What just happened? It was like I relived that part of my life. You know, it was because of that vision that I left. I knew then the clown would never stop until he had us. I thought it was telling me to leave, and perhaps my vision wouldn't come true. Maybe it would have happened regardless. This ends now. I'm sorry, Henry. You were right. I should have stayed. I'm gonna kill this f***ing clown. I'm gonna 86 this bastard, even if it kills me in the process. sorry, Henry. You were right. I should have stayed. I'm gonna kill this f***ing clown. I'm gonna 86 this bastard, even if it kills me in the process. All of my gear is still in my truck. I have a crossbow, machete, and gear for setting up traps. You want me to play? I'll play. Game on. I left the funeral home and got in my truck and went to Henry's house. Maybe there he left me something in case I ever came back. Maybe he knows what its weaknesses are. After all, he stayed, and there's a chance he found out ways to hurt the damn thing. Henry's house was still taped off, so after I parked, I walked around back and checked the back door. We used to always hide things under rocks like money and things we weren't supposed to have as kids. Sure enough, under a large rock was a key to the house. I made my way into the place, and it smelled like complete shit. The house would likely be condemned soon. It only had a few pieces of basic furniture and empty fast food bags and wrappers everywhere. I went into his office, and on the walls and floor were newspaper clippings, maps of the sewer system with red string stretched to each of the places victims were found. He was onto something. He circled an area on a map, which is an entrance to the sewers, not 100 yards from where we made our fort. On his desk he had notes scattered around, but one in particular caught my eye. Scribbled down on a notepad he wrote, "Silver, religious symbols, holy water, and that he seems to feed off of fear. Maybe fear itself can be turned against him in some way." And that was it. It's not much, but it's all I have. In one of his drawers, there was a bag of silver beads, a bottle of water, which I assumed to be holy water, and a crude silver cross that had been filed to a sharp point. As I grabbed the items and placed them into my duffel bag, it revealed a picture of us as kids posing in front of the fort we built, with the words "Sanctuary" written on the back. I got back into my truck, placed the picture in the visor, and drove to the hardware store. I had some things to pick up. I bought 30 feet of silver wiring, PVC pipe, a hacksaw, motion sensors, and as many nails as I could carry. The cashier asked me what these items were for. I said it was to help a friend with an experiment he was working on, and left. Seeing as I just couldn't go out and buy a stick of dynamite, I went to a fireworks store and bought a ton of fireworks. The biggest one, which was in the back, was called Fearless Fury. Now that I had supplies, I made it back to my hotel room and began putting together a plan. I cut the piping, tossed in nails, silver beads, and emptied the fireworks in them. I made 5 of these bad boys. I melted some of the silver beads and dipped my arrow tips in them, and then drove to the trail entrance by the creaking bridge. With all of my gear, which must have weighed 50 pounds, I walked over to where our fort was to set up shop. After a short walk, there it was, the sanctuary. Aside from all the mold and debris, this thing was still standing. I climbed up the tree and hoisted up my supplies with the rope. I began modifying the structure by cutting large holes so I could aim my crossbow through them. I set up the motion sensors around the perimeter so I'd be alerted if someone or something passed them. I dug as big a hole as I could, about 5 feet in diameter and about 8 feet deep, sharpened some logs and tree limbs to a point, and secured them at the bottom, then covered the opening with a thin lining of small twigs and leaves. Lastly, I set up a tripwire around several trees and connected them to 4 of the pipe bombs, so if he triggers the wire, he won't have much to laugh at. It was nearing dusk at this point, and I was exhausted. I made my way back inside the fort and passed out for what felt like hours. I woke up sometime around 3 a.m. and decided it was time to finish this. I hiked down to the opening of the sewer that was marked by Henry's map. I needed to lure this creature out somehow. I took a few steps into the dark opening to the sewer and shouted,
"Remember me, asshole? You wanted me to play? Well, here I am!"
I heard nothing but my echoes, and that's when I remembered that he feeds on fear. I was still so angry that I wasn't setting the right mood for him, so I closed my eyes and thought about the things that scare me. I even thought of the creature from the Black Lagoon. I reopened my eyes and looked down the long and pitch-black tunnel, and I saw something in the distance. Red, glowing eyes slowly moving. Looks like I caught his attention. Then I heard a familiar voice.
"You left me to die, Ethan! You promised!"
I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of dread. I left because I was afraid. I left because I couldn't make a stand. No matter how much I learned about survival, I still felt helpless. My biggest fear, became my biggest regret. But not anymore. Then the clown spoke.
Look at you pretending to be brave. You're not scared, Ethan. You can lie to yourself, but you can't lie to me. I can taste it now. Tastes just as real as it did for poor Henry. You know, he tried to do what you're doing. He thought he was brave too. You should have seen it. His sweet, sweet fear was delicious. I'm the embodiment of fear itself, older than your gods. And I'll be here long after your kind has all become extinct. Now, let's play.
In a matter of milliseconds, he was right in front of me. His form began to shift into the same black lagoon monster from when I was a child. As he was morphing, I was able to snap out of it and run back to the area of the fort. He was close behind me. He took the bait. I was scared, sure, but I owed it to myself, and most importantly, Henry, to see this through. I made it back to the fort and climbed up, and everything was set. I grabbed my crossbow and peered out of the window. At first, I saw nothing, just the slow-flowing leaves of the trees in the middle of the night. Then, behind me, one of the motion sensors was tripped, triggering the pipe bombs, and an explosion of great magnitude shook the ground, sending fireworks and nails crashing in every direction in a bright display of explosive glory. Shards of metal splintered the wood surrounding the fort and the trees. It had to have killed him. I eagerly waited for the smoke to clear. As the area settled, I squinted and focused my eyes with a heightened awareness I've never experienced before. My heart was pounding out of my chest, but I saw nothing, just a giant crater where the explosion happened. Then, I heard laughing. The clown was taunting me, first behind me, then coming from nearly all angles until it was deafening. I tried to concentrate. In a split second of clarity, I aimed my crossbow into the empty woods. Then as fast as I could, I whipped the crossbow over my head and fell back and shot behind me. The silver-tipped arrow hit the beast in the chest. It moaned in pain for a moment. It can be harmed. It can die. I reloaded my crossbow and fired what must have been 6 arrows into its body and face. Each time, it would stumble back just a little bit. It took a huge puff of air, and then bloated itself, shooting the arrows out from their entry wounds. One arrow clipped my upper thigh, piercing into the bone. Ah! I was hurt, but I've been through much worse. I got back up and snapped the arrow in my leg and threw it to the ground. The blood started oozing out of the clown's wounds and floated in a slow stream in the air like gravity didn't affect it. He looked at me, and I saw a hidden look in his eye that he wasn't sure about himself. He was starting to fear me this time. You're nothing! I take back all the energy I ever gave you! You're pathetic! I swung my machete, lopping off his hand. He looked at it and sarcastically acted like he was in pain, and changed his fake grimacing into an evil smile that I've grown a real distaste for.
This is it? This is your big plan? I thought you would have had more.
I can't die.
Ready for my last trick?
His mouth opened unnaturally wide, and a white beam of brilliant light shot out and struck me in the eyes. I was paralyzed. He began slowly approaching me, and I started to float in the air. Then, a miracle happened. He stepped right onto the pit, snapping the twigs, and falling into the spikes below. He screamed in anguish. Ah! It was now or never. I looked into the hole and saw the clown pierced with stakes in nearly every limb, including his big ugly-ass head. He tried moving, but was stuck in place by stakes, and his efforts looked more like convulsive twitches. I grabbed the silver cross from my pocket, and like a ninja star I threw it, connecting with his cheek. It hissed, and the silver burned and boiled his skin. Was it dying? It spoke again, in a deepened yet quivering tone.
I'll come back for you.
With the last pipe bomb in hand, I held out my arms and said, You thought you were the embodiment of fear? Well, I'm the embodiment of vengeance! I'm taking back my home, you son of a bitch! I ignited the bomb and threw it in the hole. And in a spectacle of color and noise, an explosion jostled the ground once more with flesh and blood shooting everywhere. It was like a grand finale on the 4th of July, the sound of meat and bone crashing to the ground surrounding me. Just then, I started to feel the pain from the arrow in my leg. And the reality of the situation began to emerge. Did I kill it? I crawled to the opening of the hole and looked down. Whatever was left of the clown was a charred, steaming glop of skin and bone fragments. He was gone. A feeling of closure and peace overcame me. The air felt different. I could breathe again. I got up and managed to make my way up to the fort and climb to the roof. Sitting there was the can of red paint from 27 years ago, with the lid still tightly securing it. I pried it open and dipped my fingers in and spread a streak across each eye like war paint from when we were kids. I got on my feet, reached my arms out, and screamed our battle cry. I could swear I heard Henry's voice doing the same thing. The roof gave way where I was standing, and I collapsed into a small hole I just created, landing inside the fort and getting knocked unconscious. When I woke up, I took a moment to gather myself and look up at the morning sunlight beaming through the opening of the roof, shining a perfect spotlight on the sign Henry and I made. The sanctuary